What happens when a dinner party ends with a guest vanishing without explanation? When your son's best friend turns out to be a serial killer who brought him home drunk the night before? When an abandoned house reveals a stranger living in its basement? Or when a police officer at your door isn't actually police at all? Tonight we bring you 10 true accounts of ordinary moments that transformed into mysteries and terrors no one could have predicted. A host haunted by a disappeared guest. A mother discovering her son nearly became a murder victim. Friends exploring an abandoned school who encountered something that made them run for their lives. These stories share a common thread, the fracture of trust and safety in the most unexpected ways. Watson thought hosting dinner parties was simple hospitality until Tom vanished, leaving only a cryptic journal entry. A mother thought her son's friend was trustworthy until news reports revealed a pattern of killing. Urban explorers thought abandoned buildings held only dust and memories until a basement stranger proved otherwise. An elderly man's warning at a gas station seemed like rambling until supernatural events confirmed his words. Each account reveals how quickly normalcy can shatter, how people we think we know can harbor unimaginable darkness, and how places we think are empty might not be empty at all. From dinner party mysteries to false police invasions, from duplicate beds appearing in locked apartments to graveyard shift rescues, from haunted schools to ominous warnings that prove prophetic, these 10 stories map the terrain where everyday life intersects with the inexplicable and the terrifying. The narrators survived to tell what happened, though survival came with costs measured in sleepless nights, broken trust, and the knowledge that safety is always conditional. Listen to their warnings, remember their experiences, and when your own dinner guest acts strangely, when a friend seems too helpful, when something feels wrong despite appearing normal, trust your instincts, because as these 10 people learned, the difference between an ordinary night and a nightmare is often just a moment, just a door opening, just a decision to investigate rather than flee. My name is Watson, and I live in a small, quiet town where everyone knows each other and secrets are hard to keep. I enjoy hosting dinner parties at my house, bringing friends together for good food and conversation in an atmosphere of warmth and trust. It was a warm summer evening when I decided to host another gathering, inviting my closest friends, Sarah, who worked at the library, Mark, the high school teacher, Lisa from bakery, and John, who managed the hardware store. Along with them, I invited Tom, a new friend who had recently moved to town and seemed to need connection and community. I had no idea this night would turn into a mystery that still haunts me years later, a puzzle with missing pieces that refuses to resolve itself into anything resembling understanding. I spent the entire day preparing for the party with meticulous attention to every detail that might contribute to a perfect evening. The table was set with my best dishes collected over years from antique shops and family inheritances, each piece chosen to create atmosphere. The house smelled of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread, scents that filled every room and promised comfort to anyone who entered. The sun was setting as my friends started arriving, casting warm golden glow through the windows and painting everything in soft amber light that made the whole scene feel almost magical. Sarah arrived first with a bottle of wine and her infectious laugh. Mark brought flowers from his garden. Lisa carried her famous chocolate cake that everyone always requested. John came with stories from his latest fishing trip, already making everyone smile before he fully entered the house. Tom arrived last, a bit hesitant at the door as if unsure whether he truly belonged in this gathering of people who had known each other for years. He was a mystery even before that night. He had recently moved to our town from somewhere he never quite specified, taking a job at the local library where Sarah said he worked quietly among the stacks and rarely engaged with patrons beyond necessary transactions. He was quiet and reserved in our previous encounters, the kind of person who listened more than talked and seemed to observe everything while participating in nothing. I thought it would be nice to include him in our group, to help him feel welcome in a town where everyone else had deep roots and shared history. When I extended the invitation earlier that week, his face had lit up with genuine happiness that suggested loneliness finally finding relief and offered friendship. We all gathered around the table as evening deepened outside the windows, laughing and sharing stories as we ate the meal I had prepared with such care. The dinner went smoothly with everyone enjoying the food and each other's company in an easy way that happens between people who are comfortable together. After dessert, we moved to the living room to continue our conversations, settling into deep couches with coffee and Lisa's cake. Tom was unusually quiet during this part of the evening, barely speaking when addressed directly and avoiding eye contact with everyone at the table. I noticed but didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe he was just shy. I told myself, or perhaps he didn't feel comfortable yet in a group where everyone else had years of shared experiences and inside jokes. I made mental note to check on him later, to make sure he was feeling included and welcome. As the evening progressed, Tom's mood seemed to shift in ways that became increasingly difficult to ignore. He became tense and irritable, his shoulders rigid and his jaw clenched as if he was fighting some internal battle none of us could see. He stopped even attempting to participate in conversation, sitting silently on the edge of the couch while the rest of us talked and laughed around him. He avoided eye contact completely now, staring instead at the floor, the walls, or out the dark windows where nothing was visible except our own reflection staring back. Eventually, he stood up abruptly, his sudden movement making his chair scrape loudly against the hardwood floor and causing everyone to stop mid-conversation and turn to look at him. He muttered something about needing to leave. The words were unclear, mumbled and almost inaudible. Before I could say anything, before I could ask if he was all right or if something had upset him, he was out the door, slamming it behind him with force that rattled the windows and left all of us sitting in stunned silence wondering what had just happened. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with Tom's sudden departure. I decided to check on him, hoping to find out what had upset him so badly at the dinner party and to make sure he was okay. I drove to his house on Maple Street, a small rental he'd moved into just 2 months earlier. His car was in the driveway, the same blue sedan I'd seen him driving around town, but when I knocked on the door there was no answer. I knocked again, louder this time, calling his name. Still nothing. The curtains were drawn and I couldn't see inside. I tried the doorbell but heard no movement within the house. It seemed as if no one was home despite the car sitting right there in plain view. A few days passed and I still hadn't heard from Tom. I reached out to my friend from the dinner party, but no one had seen or heard from him either. Sarah checked at the library where they both worked. Tom hadn't shown up for his shifts and hadn't called in sick. His supervisor was concerned but assumed he'd had a family emergency and would contact him soon. After a week of silence, I became genuinely worried and decided to call the police to report him missing. They took my statement with professional courtesy, but I could tell they weren't overly concerned. Adults have the right to disappear if they want to, the officer explained, and there was no evidence of foul play. Still, they assured me they would look into it and sent officers to check his house. Weeks turned into months with no sign of Tom anywhere in town or the surrounding areas. The police had searched his house, finding it neat and organized with no signs of struggle or hurried departure. They talked to neighbors who reported seeing nothing unusual. They followed every lead I could provide about his habits and routines, but found nothing that explained where he had gone or why. My friends and I were left with more questions and answers, unable to understand what had caused Tom to vanish so completely. I couldn't help but feel responsible, wondering if I had missed some sign at the dinner party, if there was something I could have said or done to prevent whatever happened to him. Determined to find some answers, I started looking into Tom's past, searching for clues that might explain his disappearance. I learned from his landlord and a few casual acquaintances that he had moved to our town after a difficult breakup with a long-term partner. He was looking for a fresh start, a place where nobody knew him and he could reinvent himself away from painful memories. He didn't have many friends despite living here for months, and his family lived far away in another state with whom he had minimal contact according to his emergency contact information at work. The more I learned, the more I realized how little any of us actually knew about Tom. He had been a stranger pretending to be a friend, or perhaps a lonely person too damaged to let anyone truly see him. One evening while going through Tom's house with the landlord's permission, he was planning to clear it out and re-rent since Tom had now been missing for 3 months. I found an old journal that the police had somehow overlooked in their initial search. It was tucked behind books on the shelf in his bedroom, a simple leather-bound notebook filled with Tom's handwriting. I sat on his bed and began reading, my hands trembling as I turned the pages. The entries revealed a deeply troubled mind, someone who felt fundamentally out of place not just in our town but in life itself. He wrote about feeling disconnected from other people, unable to form genuine bonds, always watching from outside looking in at a world he couldn't quite access. The entries grew progressively darker, filled with paranoia and fear that something was following him, watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. The last entry was dated the night of my dinner party. It read, "I can't escape it. It's always watching, always waiting. I need to leave before it's too late." Reading those words sent a chill down my spine that I can still feel years later whenever I think about that night. A few years ago, my son Alex was brought home late one night by his friend James, and that ordinary moment would later reveal itself as a near-miss with death that still makes my blood run cold when I think about it. Alex was 20 at the time and had been out with friends celebrating someone's birthday at bars downtown. I was already in bed when I heard the front door open around 2 in the morning. I quickly got up to check what was happening, pulling on my robe as I hurried down the stairs. I reached the living room to find James struggling to hold Alex up. My son was very drunk, barely able to stand on his own, his clothes disheveled and his eyes half closed. James was a tall, muscular young man I'd met several times before, someone who seemed responsible and trustworthy, the kind of friend any mother would be glad her son had chosen. "Sorry about this," James said, his voice steady and apologetic as he helped Alex stumble through the doorway. Alex had a bit too much to drink tonight. I wanted to make sure he got home safely. I nodded, my concern for my son overshadowing any frustration I might have felt about the late hour or the state he was in. Together we managed to get Alex up the stairs and into his bedroom, James supporting most of his weight with surprising ease. I pulled off Alex's shoes and tucked him into bed while he mumbled incoherently, his head lolling to the side. I hoped he would sleep it off and feel better in the morning, maybe learn a lesson about drinking in moderation. James watched for a moment before turning to leave, and I walked him to the door to thank him for bringing Alex home safely instead of letting him try to drive or call a cab in his condition. "No problem," James replied with a small smile that seemed genuine and kind. "I'll check on him tomorrow, make sure he's recovering okay." With that, James left, and I went back to my room, relieved that Alex was safe in his own bed despite his poor decisions that evening. The next day, Alex was groggy and nauseated, but otherwise fine, suffering through a well-deserved hangover. He didn't remember much from the previous night, just fragments of being at the bar with friends and having too much to drink. He vaguely recalled James offering to drive him home, helping him to the car, and then nothing until waking up in his own bed. Life went on as usual, and I didn't think much more about that night, filing it away as just another example of young people making mistakes and learning from them. A year later, everything changed in the most horrific way imaginable. One evening, I was watching the news when a breaking story caught my attention with the force of a physical blow. The reporter was standing in front of a hotel downtown, yellow crime scene tape visible in the background, describing a murder that had taken place there earlier that day. My heart sank as I listened, though I didn't yet know why this particular story felt so significant. A young man was found dead in his hotel room this morning. The reporter said, her expression grave. The victim, whose name has not been released pending family notification, was reportedly checked into the hotel by a friend last night. Police are now searching for that friend, who is considered the primary suspect in what appears to be a brutal homicide. I felt a chill run down my spine as the reporter continued, something about the story seeming disturbingly familiar, though I couldn't immediately place why. According to witnesses, the suspect was seen leaving the hotel early this morning. The police have released this composite sketch of the suspect based on hotel security footage and witness descriptions. The screen showed a police artist drawing of a man who looked eerily, impossibly like James, my son's friend who had brought him home drunk a year ago. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to process what I was seeing, my mind initially refusing to accept the connection. Could it really be him? The thought was almost too terrible to contemplate. I immediately called Alex, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. He answered on the third ring, his voice sleepy and annoyed at being woken from an afternoon nap. "Turn on the news right now," I said urgently. "Channel 7. There's something you need to see immediately." Last September, my friends, and I decided to go for a night drive, bored with our usual routines and wanting some kind of adventure to break the monotony of small-town life. It was a cold, clear night with a moon bright enough to make the empty roads look mysterious and inviting. There were 4 of us in the car, me, Alex, who was driving, Sam in the passenger seat, and Jenny in the back with me. We drove aimlessly for a while, laughing and playing music, but soon the conversation turned to ghost stories and urban legends. Someone mentioned an old abandoned house at the edge of town, a place that had been empty for years and had accumulated all sorts of dark rumors and frightening tales. "We should go there," Sam suggested with a grin that was equal parts excitement and nervousness. The idea was thrilling and scary at the same time, exactly the kind of adventure we'd been seeking. We all agreed despite the apprehension building in my stomach, and Alex turned the car in the direction of the house. The road became narrow and bumpy as we got closer, Paved streets giving way to gravel and then to packed dirt. Tall trees lined the path on both sides, their branches looking like twisted fingers reaching toward each other over the road in the moonlight. Finally we saw it, the old abandoned house standing at the end of a long overgrown driveway. It was large and imposing with broken windows like empty eye sockets and a sagging roof that looked ready to collapse. The house was surrounded by overgrown bushes and tall grass that had gone wild without anyone to tend it for years. Our car's headlights cast eerie shadows on the crumbling walls, making the whole structure look even more ominous than it had in daylight photographs we'd seen. We parked the car a little way down the road, not wanting to draw attention to ourselves or block the driveway in case we needed to leave quickly. As we walked toward the house, the air felt noticeably colder, our breath visible in small clouds, and I could hear the sound of our footsteps crunching on gravel echo in the silent night. My heart was beating fast, and I could tell from their body language that my friends were nervous too despite our attempt to seem brave and casual. We reached the front door, which was hanging off its hinges at an angle with rotted and paint peeling. Alex pushed it open with a loud creak that made us all jump slightly, and we stepped inside one by one, clicking on our flashlights to cut through the darkness. The air inside was musty and stale, carrying the smell of mold and decay that comes from years of abandonment and weather damage. Moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting long dramatic shadows on the dusty floor that showed our footprints as we moved through the space. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of old wooden floorboards under our weight. We decided to stick together rather than split up, none of us wanting to get lost in the maze of dark corridors and empty rooms. Jenny and I went upstairs while Alex and Sam stayed on the ground floor to explore the kitchen and living areas. The stairs groaned under our weight as we climbed, each step echoing through the empty house in a way that made me constantly look over my shoulder expecting to see something behind us. Upstairs we found old furniture covered in white dusty sheets, broken picture frames scattered on the floor with photographs too faded and water damaged to make out faces, and cobwebs in every corner thick as curtains. It felt like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen or for us to leave and stop disturbing whatever piece the abandonment had brought. In one of the bedrooms, I found an old diary on a dusty table, its letter cover cracked and faded. I picked it up carefully and opened it, but the pages were too yellowed and water-stained to read, the ink having run and faded until only ghost impressions of words remained. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash from downstairs that made my heart jump into my throat with adrenaline-fueled fear. "Alex? Sam?" Jenny called out loudly, but there was no answer from below, just silence that felt heavy and wrong. We hurried back down the stairs as quickly as we could without falling, our flashlights bouncing wildly and creating disorienting shadows everywhere. The living room was empty when we reached it, but something was wrong. The front door was now closed. We hadn't heard it shut, and none of us remembered closing it when we came in. A sense of dread washed over me, cold and heavy. "Let's find them and get out of here," I said, my voice shaking despite my attempt to sound calm. We moved through the house, checking each room with increasing panic. The kitchen was empty, cabinets hanging open and counters covered in dust. The dining room held only a broken table and chairs scattered like someone had left in a violent hurry. As we entered the last room, a small storage space at the back of the house, we found Alex and Sam. They were standing completely still, staring at something on the floor, their faces pale in the flashlight beams. I followed their gaze and saw what had captured their attention, a trapdoor in the floor, wooden and old, and it was standing open, revealing darkness below. "Did you open it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from their expressions. Sam shook his head slowly, not taking his eye from the opening. It was already like this when we got here. We heard the crash and came to investigate and found this. A cold draft came up from the trapdoor, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and something else, something organic and unpleasant that made my stomach turn. Against every instinct screaming at me to leave immediately, we decided to go down and investigate what was below. The group mentality of not wanting to seem scared in front of each other pushed us to make a decision that would haunt us forever. A narrow wooden ladder descended into the darkness, its rungs looking ancient and questionable. The ladder creaked ominously as we descended one by one, Alex first since he was the strongest, then Sam, then me, and finally Jenny. The basement was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned house, damp and cold with walls lined with shelves full of dusty mason jars and old rusted tools hanging from hooks. In the corner there was a small flickering light that drew our attention immediately, a light that shouldn't exist in a house with no electricity. We approached cautiously and found an old oil lantern hanging from a nail in the wall, its flame dancing and casting shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. Someone had been down here recently. Someone had lit that lantern. The realization hit us all at the same moment, and we froze, listening. That's when we heard it. Footsteps above us. Someone else was in the house. Not the creaking of an old structure settling, but deliberate footsteps of a person walking. The sound grew louder, coming closer to where the trapdoor opening was located directly above our heads. We turned off our flashlights instinctively and stood completely still in the dim lantern light, hoping whoever it was would pass by without noticing the open trapdoor. But the footsteps stopped right above us. We held our breath collectively, for people standing in terrified silence. Then slowly, deliberately, the trapdoor that had been standing open began to move, someone above pulling it wider. A figure appeared at the top of the ladder, silhouetted against the slightly lighter darkness of the room above. It was a man, tall and thin with wild, unkempt hair and eyes that seemed to reflect the lantern light in an inhuman way. He began climbing down the ladder slowly and methodically, as if he had all the time in the world. We backed away from the ladder, trying to stay in the shadows, our hearts pounding so loud I was sure he could hear them. The man reached the basement floor and moved slowly through the space, muttering to himself in words we couldn't understand, searching for something among the shelves and tools. I worked the night shift at a quiet gas station in New Hampshire, a job that was usually calm and uneventful in the best possible way. My duties included stocking shelves with cigarettes and snacks, cleaning the bathrooms and floors, and handling the register when the occasional customer stopped by to fill their tank or grab coffee and a sandwich. The nights were typically so quiet that I could read books or watch movies on my phone between customers. One particular night, as I was preparing to close up for my shift change at 6 a.m., I noticed the air felt different. There was a strange stillness, like the world was holding its breath before something significant happened. I tried to shrug it off as imagination heightened by exhaustion from working overnight hours. As the clock neared midnight, an old car pulled up to the pump outside, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Out stepped an elderly man wearing khakis and a button-down shirt that looked neat and well-maintained despite their age. His white hair was neatly combed, and he moved with slow, deliberate grace, suggesting someone who was careful and methodical about everything. He walked into the store, and I greeted him with my standard customer service smile. "Good evening, sir. How can I help you tonight?" I asked cheerfully. He nodded politely without speaking and began walking around the small store, browsing the shelves of snacks and drinks as if looking for something specific, though his eyes seemed to be looking through the products rather than at them. After a few minutes of browsing, he approached the counter carrying a small bottle of water and a pack of gum. Simple purchases that seemed almost like an excuse to interact rather than genuine needs. "Will that be all for you tonight?" I asked as I began ringing up his items, the register beeping with each scan. He nodded again, his eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't explain why. There was something unsettling about his gaze, something that seemed to see more than what was visible on the surface. As I handed him his change, he reached out suddenly and gripped my wrist, his touch surprisingly cold as if his hands had been in ice water. "Hell is a real place," he said in a low, gravelly voice that made every hair on my arm stand up. "And the devil has already got his hand on you. Girl, be careful." I froze completely, staring at him in shock and confusion. His words hung in the air between us, heavy and foreboding, seeming to echo in the small space of the gas station. What did he mean? Why would he say something like that to a stranger? Before I could formulate any response, he released my wrist abruptly, took his items from the counter, and walked out of the store without another word or backward glance. I watched through the window as he got into his car and drove away, the taillights disappearing into the darkness of the empty road. For several minutes I just stood there behind the counter, my heart pounding in my chest and my mind racing to process what had just happened. His words echoed in my head on repeat. Hell is a real place, and the devil has already got his hand on you. The way he had gripped my wrist, the intensity in his eyes, the absolute certainty in his voice, none of it felt like the rambling of a confused elderly person. It felt like a warning from someone who knew something terrible that I didn't. I tried to shake off a feeling and go back to my closing duties, counting the register, restocking cigarettes, wiping down the coffee station, but the unease lingered like smoke I couldn't clear from the air. My name is John, and I enjoy taking my family on little adventures to escape the noise and stress of city living. We live in a crowded urban area, so sometimes we like to escape to the countryside for weekends of fresh air and open spaces. One summer I rented an old farmhouse through Airbnb that looked absolutely perfect in the photos. Big yard with ancient trees, old-fashioned charm with exposed beams and a wraparound porch, and even a swimming pool that would keep the kids entertained. It seemed like an ideal spot to relax and unwind for a long weekend away from our normal routines. We arrived on a sunny Friday afternoon. My wife Julian and our 2 kids, Liam, who was 8, and Zoe, who was 6, both excited and bouncing with energy after the 3-hour drive. The farmhouse stood at the end of a long gravel road surrounded by dense woods and fields that stretched to the horizon. It had that wide, welcoming porch with creaky wooden steps and rocking chairs that invited you to sit and watch the sunset. Inside was exactly as advertised, full of antique furniture and old family pictures on the walls, hardwood floors that creaked pleasantly underfoot, and windows that let in golden afternoon light. After unpacking our bags and exploring all the rooms with the kids claiming bedrooms, we decided to spend the evening by the pool. The kids splashed around happily while Julian and I sat on the edge dipping our feet in the cool water, feeling the stress of work and city life melting away in the peaceful rural setting. The air was fresh with the smell of cut grass and wildflowers, and the only sounds were the kids' laughter and the gentle rustling of leaves in the warm breeze. As night fell, we set up some outdoor lights around the pool area and had dinner on the patio, sandwiches and fruit. Nothing fancy, but tasting better somehow in the open air under emerging stars. Everything seemed absolutely perfect, exactly what we'd hoped for when booking this getaway. But then I heard it, a crunching sound like someone walking deliberately on the gravel driveway or through dry leaves in the woods. I looked around trying to locate the source, but it was dark beyond the reach of our patio lights, just shadows and tree shapes against slightly lighter sky. "Did you hear that?" I asked Julian, trying to keep my voice casual so the kids wouldn't pick up on any concern. "I'm sure it's just an animal," she replied, attempting to sound calm though I could hear the slight tension in her voice. "Probably a deer or raccoon. This is a country after all." But the sounds continued, and they seemed to be getting closer rather than moving away as an animal would likely do. The footsteps, because that's clearly what they were now, not random animal movement, had a deliberate quality that made my protective parental instincts activate. I told the kids to get out of the pool immediately and go inside, trying to make it sound like bedtime rather than retreat from potential danger. We gathered our things quickly, towels and toys and drinks, and I locked the door behind us once everyone was safely inside the farmhouse. The house felt secure with its solid walls and locks, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that our peaceful weekend had just taken a turn towards something threatening. I checked all the windows, making sure they were locked, tested the doors twice, and kept the outdoor lights on so we could see if anyone approached the house. Julian put the kid to bed with her usual bedtime stories, her voice steady and soothing though I could see the worry in her eyes when she came back downstairs. We sat together in the living room with most lights off, watching through the windows and listening for any sounds that didn't belong. In 2016, I had an experience that still makes me question reality and my own sanity whenever I think about it too deeply. It was a Saturday night, and I was feeling completely exhausted after a particularly brutal week of work that had included overtime and difficult projects. I decided to go to bed unusually early around 9 p.m., hoping to catch up on the sleep I'd been missing all week. My small apartment was quiet as usual, just the occasional hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the distant sounds of neighbors in the building around me. I crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, closed my eyes, and soon drifted off into what felt like a very deep sleep, the kind where dreams are vivid but consciousness is completely suspended. When I finally woke up, it was still dark outside, the kind of complete darkness that suggests very late night or very early morning. I reached groggily for my phone on the nightstand to check what time it was, my hand fumbling in the darkness until my fingers closed around the familiar shape. The screen lit up showing 3:33 a.m. in bright digital numbers. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes and trying to orient myself after such deep sleep. That's when I noticed something that made my heart stop and my breath catch in my throat. There was another bed in my room right next to mine, perhaps 2 feet away where there had been empty floor space when I went to sleep. I was absolutely certain it wasn't there when I fell asleep earlier that evening. My apartment was small, just a one-bedroom unit with barely enough space for my existing furniture, and there was definitely no room for an extra bed. I blinked several times hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me in the darkness and disorientation of waking at such an unusual hour. But the bed remained solidly there no matter how many times I blinked or rubbed my eyes. It was identical to mine. Same dark wooden frame, same white sheets and pillows, positioned parallel like we were in some kind of hotel room with double occupancy. But what absolutely terrified me, what made cold sweat break out across my entire body, was a figure lying in that impossible bed. Someone was under the white sheet, completely still and silent. The sheet was pulled up over their head so I couldn't see their face or any identifying features, just the outline of a human form beneath thin fabric. My mind raced with questions that had no logical answers. Who could it be? How did they get into my locked apartment? How did an entire bed appear in my room while I was sleeping? I wanted to scream, but my voice seemed stuck somewhere deep in my throat, trapped by fear and confusion. Should I call the police? Should I try to wake the person? Should I run from my own apartment and seek help from neighbors? My hand trembled violently as I slowly reached for the light switch on my bedside lamp, missing it twice before finally making contact and flooding the room with sudden brightness. The figure in the bed didn't move or react to the light in any way. I could see now that the sheet was thin and slightly transparent in the lamplight, worn with age and covered in small stains that suggested long use. I could make out the general shape of the person's body underneath. They appeared to be taller than average, lying completely flat and motionless in a way that seemed almost unnaturally still, like a mannequin or a corpse rather than a sleeping person whose chest should rise and fall with breathing. I was working the graveyard shift at my gas station job, a position I'd held for about 6 months despite the toll that overnight hours took on my sleep schedule and social life. The night was progressing normally. I'd had maybe 5 customers total since starting my shift at 11 p.m., mostly truckers stopping for coffee and bathroom breaks on their long hauls. I was halfway through my shift around 2:30 a.m. when the door chimed, and I looked up expecting another trucker. Instead, I saw a woman holding a young boy's hand, and immediately I knew something was very wrong. They both looked scared in a deep, visceral way, their eyes wide and constantly glancing back toward the parking lot and the darkness beyond. The woman's clothes were torn and dirty as if she'd been running through woods or struggling with someone. Her face was streaked with tears, both fresh and dried, makeup smeared beyond recognition. The boy, who looked maybe 7 or 8 years old, clung to her side with both hands, his eyes wide with fear that no child should ever have to experience. She approached the counter quickly, and her voice was shaky when she spoke. "Can I use your phone, please? It's an emergency." I didn't hesitate, immediately handing her the cordless store phone from behind the counter. As she dialed with trembling hands, I noticed bruises forming on her arms and what looked like scratches on her neck, signs of violence that made my protective instincts flare immediately. The boy stayed pressed close to her, looking around nervously at the aisles and windows as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. I tried not to obviously stare, but couldn't help noticing details. The boy's shirt was on backward like he'd dressed in a hurry. The woman had only one shoe on. Her voice when she spoke into the phone was urgent and hushed, like she was afraid of being overheard despite us being the only people in the store. She was trying to reach someone for help. Her words rushed and overlapping. I couldn't make out everything she was saying, but caught fragments. "Please come get us. He found us again. I don't know how long we have." After the call, she asked in a voice barely above a whisper if they could stay in the store for a while, her eyes pleading in a way that suggested she had nowhere else to go and no other option for safety. Of course, I said immediately without even thinking about store policy or my manager's potential reaction. "You can stay as long as you need. Are you okay? Do you need me to call the police?" She shook her head quickly, almost frantically. "No police, not yet. I just need somewhere safe to sit for a few minutes while I figure out what to do next." I offered them free drinks from the cooler and snacks from the shelves, anything to make them more comfortable and show that they were safe here at least temporarily. The woman's face softened slightly at the kindness I'd shown and thanked me quietly. They took the items I offered, water bottles and granola bars, and settled into a corner booth near the back of the store where they had a clear view of both the front door and the parking lot outside. The boy munched on a candy bar I'd given him while the woman sipped water, her eyes never stopping their constant surveillance of the windows and door. I kept an eye on them from behind the counter, making sure they felt safe while trying to give them some privacy in their obvious distress. An hour passed with no other customers entering the store. The woman and boy remained in their corner, the child eventually falling asleep with his head on her lap while she stroked his hair with one hand and kept the other on her phone ready to dial at any moment. The unease in my stomach continued to grow as I wondered what they were running from, and who might come looking for them. I had a terrible feeling that whoever had hurt this woman wasn't going to just let them disappear without trying to find them. My instincts proved correct when the door chimed again around 3:30 a.m., this time with aggressive force that made the bells rattle violently. A man stormed into the store, his face twisted with rage and his entire body radiating barely controlled violence. "There you are," he shouted, making a beeline directly for the woman and boy in their corner booth. The woman shrank back instinctively, pulling her son closer in a protective gesture that spoke of long practice defending him from this man's anger. The boy woke with a frightened cry, immediately understanding the danger. "So, you need to leave right now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and authoritative despite my heart pounding with fear. I stepped out from behind the counter, positioning myself between this angry man and the terrified woman and child. "Get out of my way," he roared, spittle flying from his mouth. "She's coming with me. That's my girlfriend and my kid, and they belong at home with me, not hiding in some gas station in the middle of the night." He tried to push past me, but I held my ground, my hands up in a placating gesture while my mind raced through options. I wasn't a fighter, and this man was bigger than me, clearly capable of violence, but I couldn't just let him drag them out of here. "Say, I'm calling the police right now," I warned, reaching for the phone on the counter with one hand while keeping the other up between us. "You need to leave immediately or you'll be arrested for trespassing and assault." His eyes flashed with increased rage at my interference, and he lunged at me, trying to grab the phone from my hand. We struggled briefly and the phone clattered to the floor, but I managed to pick it back up and dial 911 while backing away from his reaching hands. "Help! We need police at a gas station on Elm Street immediately," I shouted into the phone, giving our address while the dispatcher assured me help was on the way. The man continued shouting, alternating between threats directed at me and pleas directed at the woman, trying to convince her to come with him voluntarily while also making it clear what would happen if she refused. When I was young, I had a passion for exploring abandoned places that bordered on obsession. The mystery of old empty buildings always called to me with irresistible force. The idea that these places once buzzed with life and activity but now stood silent and decaying fascinated me on a deep level. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to explore an abandoned school on the outskirts of our town. The building had been empty for at least a decade, closed down when the district consolidated and built a newer facility across town. Many stories and rumors surrounded it. People claimed it was haunted, so they heard strange noises coming from inside at night, reported seeing shadows moving past broken windows when the building should be completely empty. We met up one Friday evening after dark. There were 4 of us, including me. Tom, who was always up for any adventure no matter how risky, Lisa, who brought her expensive camera to document everything, and Sarah, who was brave despite being the youngest in our group. We packed flashlights, snacks, our phones fully charged, and a sense of excitement mixed with genuine fear about what we might encounter. As we walked toward the school building, we talked about the stories we'd heard, building up the mythology in our minds. Some people said they heard children's voices singing at midnight. Others claimed to see a janitor still making his rounds decades after the school closed. The stories were probably all nonsense, but they added to the thrill of what we were about to do. When we reached the school, it looked even more ominous than we'd imagined, like something from a horror movie set. The windows were broken with jagged glass still clinging to frames. The doors were boarded up with warped plywood, and vines had grown over much of the exterior walls, giving an organic decayed appearance. Paint peeled from every surface, and the roof sagged dangerously in several places. We found our entry point through a broken window at the back of the building, each of us climbing through carefully to avoid the remaining glass shards. Once inside, we turned on our flashlights, the beams cutting through thick darkness to reveal dusty hallways lined with old lockers, their doors hanging open like gaping mouths. The air inside was oppressively thick with a smell of mold and decay, making it slightly difficult to breathe comfortably. We decided to stick together rather than split up, moving as a group through the maze of corridors. We started our exploration in the main hallway where administrative offices were located. The principal's office door stood ajar and we pushed it open slowly, hinges screaming in protest. Inside was chaos. Papers scattered everywhere across the floor and desk, filing cabinets tipped over with their contents spilled out, the desk itself overturned as if someone had left in extreme hurry or there had been some kind of violent struggle. I shivered thinking about what could have caused such disorder. Next, we moved systematically through the classrooms, each one a time capsule of educational materials frozen in abandonment. Old desks and chairs filled the rooms, some broken and others just covered in years of accumulated dust. Books were left open on desks, their pages yellowed and brittle with age, as if students had simply stood up one day and walked out never to return. In one particular classroom, we found a chalkboard with strange writing still visible despite the passage of time. The words were partially smeared and difficult to read completely, but what we could make out looked like some kind of warning or message. Don't go to the gym, and below that something about his still there waiting. Tom laughed it off nervously, suggesting it was probably just kids who'd broken in before us playing pranks and trying to scare future explorers. As we continued exploring deeper into the abandoned school building, moving from classroom to classroom and floor to floor, we suddenly heard a loud bang echoing through the empty structure. The sound came from somewhere below us, metallic and violent like a door slamming or something heavy being dropped. We all froze instantly, our hearts pounding in collective fear. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. We nodded silently, eyes wide and the flashlight beams crossing each other in the darkness. Every instinct told us to leave immediately, to get out while we still could, but curiosity and the desire not to appear cowardly in front of each other pushed us to investigate the source of the sound. We followed the direction the bang had come from, moving cautiously down a long dark hallway lined with old photographs still hanging on the walls. The photos showed students and teachers from decades past, their faces smiling and happy in frozen moments of school events and portraits. It felt eerie like they were watching us, their eyes seeming to follow our movement as we passed. At the end of the hallway we reached the gymnasium, its double doors closed but not locked. We could hear strange sound coming from inside, shuffling movements, something dragging across the floor, and what might have been breathing or might have been wind through broken windows. With a deep breath, Tom pushed the doors open slowly, and they swung inward with a prolonged creak that sounded impossibly loud in the silence. The gym was huge, our flashlights barely reaching the far corners or the ceiling high above where basketball hoops still hung motionless. We stepped inside carefully, the floor creaking beneath our feet with each step. In the middle of the basketball court, we saw something that made our blood run completely cold. A figure stood there, its back to us, dressed in old tattered clothes that hung off its frame in ragged strips. It was completely motionless except for its shoulders, which rose and fell as if it were breathing heavily, though we couldn't hear any sound of breath from this distance. We stood frozen at the gym entrance, not knowing what to do or say, unable to process what we were seeing or decide whether to approach or flee. Suddenly, the figure began to turn around slowly, deliberately, as if it had all the time in the world and knew we weren't going anywhere. As it rotated to face us, we saw its face illuminated in our collective flashlight beams. Pale skin stretched tight over bone structure, dark sunken eyes that seemed too large for the face, features that looked almost human but not quite right in proportions or expression. The mouth opened and the figure let out a scream, a sound so chilling and inhuman that it bypassed all rational thought and went straight to primal fear centers in our brains. We ran without any conscious decision being made, just pure instinct taking over our bodies. I don't remember details of how we got out of the gymnasium or navigated back through the school's corridors to the broken window we'd entered through. All I remember is the pure terror driving us forward, the sound of that scream echoing behind us and seeming to follow no matter how fast we moved. We didn't stop running until we were far away from the school, out on the street under functioning streetlights where normal civilization existed. We stood there panting and gasping for breath, looking back at the dark shape of the abandoned school building, and knowing without discussion that we would never go back there again as long as we lived. From that night on, our passion for exploring abandoned places was completely gone, replaced by the visceral memory of that pale face and inhuman scream. We never spoke of what we saw, each of us dealing privately with the trauma and the questions about what exactly we'd encountered. Was it a homeless person living in the abandoned building who was as startled by us as we were by them? Was it something else? Something that defied rational explanation? We never found out and honestly didn't want to know. The abandoned school still stands there today, a silent reminder of the horrors that can lurk in forgotten places where no one is supposed to be. Years have passed, but I still sometimes dream about that gym, about the figure turning to face us, about that terrible scream that seemed to come from something not entirely human. The experience taught me that some places are better left undisturbed, that abandonment happens for reasons we don't always understand, and that the thrill of exploration isn't worth the nightmares that can follow. I drive past that school sometimes on my way to other parts of town, and I always speed up slightly, never looking at it directly, not wanting to be reminded too vividly of what we found in its gymnasium that night when we were young and thought we were invincible.